Welcome everyone to the tour that shows you how Assembly Square and East Somerville are connected.
So I want to welcome everybody here today to our walking tour. This is the first one that we have done since last year. We usually do several of them, but because of the pandemic we haven't. So thank you all for coming and braving the rain that's not here. So it's not going to happen, although I don't, one umbrella, thank you. That usually means we don't get rain. So my name is Brandon Wilson, and I'm here on behalf of the city's Historic Preservation Commission, where I am the director. The reason we're doing this tour today is because it's May, and that's Preservation Month in the city of Somerville. And so this is one of the things that we do to reach out to people to let them know about all the historic assets of the city of Somerville. So, and the other reason we're here today is because we wanted to kind of make it clearer to some people that Somerville is a big place, many neighborhoods, and we have a new neighborhood here at Assembly Row. So we wanted to show people in Assembly Row that in fact you're actually well connected to the other parts of Somerville despite the highway. And if anybody tried to cross over there, even Middlesex Avenue is a bit of a, of a challenge. But it is actually something that you can easily do if you know the routes to do it. So that's one of the things we're going to be doing today, is showing you the route that I'm not going to say is all that it could be. And in fact, we're working with a lot of people. We'll talk about it to improve it. But it's people like yourself that might clamor for it, and that maybe will make it happen sooner.
It kind of put it all together.
This is a bit of a walk. Some parts of it are more interesting than others. But we tried to make it as efficient as possible. So bear with us. And we're going to end up at East Somerville at the Connection Church. Doesn't look like a church, but it is. And that's where we're going to have refreshments at a reception. That'll be a little after 4 o'clock. So I hope you guys will stay around for that. They're all coming from one of the businesses over in East Somerville. So without any more from me, I'm going to introduce my partner here, which is Ed Gordon. Ed Gordon is an architectural historian that I have hired a number of times to do tours around the city. He's also done a lot of surveying here, so although he doesn't live here, he feels like he does. And he knows probably more about it than any of the people that are native even to this city. So he's going to be doing the majority of the talking. I will be interspersing with comments and things. And I encourage you, if you have questions, to feel free to raise your hand and ask us. If not during the tour, then just catch me as we're walking or at the reception at the end.
We're in Assembly Square, and as we get closer to Assembly Row, I'll go into the meanings of those two names. But for now, Assembly Square is bounded by the Fellsway and the 10 Hills neighborhood of Somerville to the north, the Mystic River to the east, Charlestown Sullivan Square to the south, and I93 over here that we can hear to the west. So it's a 143-acre, good-size area. And more immediately, let's think about where we are. We're at the Suffolk District Courthouse, originally called the Middlesex County Courthouse, and it was built in 1967. And this is interesting because when you think of architecture in the Boston area in the 60s, you're thinking in terms of buildings like the new City Hall and the Lindemann Mental Health Center, and you're talking about this style called the New Brutalism. I'd hate to see what the old Brutalism was like, but you know, this is surprising for 1967 to have a Georgian Revival courthouse, which to me, and I have not seen this anywhere written, but it looks like the architects were thinking of Newport, Rhode Island, that the centerpiece here is like the Redwood Library, and the wings kind of look like the old brick market. At least that's in my imagination. But, you know, and it was apparently built here to create a little bit of vitality in a very desolate area. This is in the period before Ford Motors pulls out in the late 50s, and then the development gets underway a bit around 1980. So they're really trying to find a way to jumpstart the development in this area. But looking across over in this direction to 10 Hills, that famously was where the sort of seasonal house of John Winthrop, the Puritan leader of the Boston settlement. That's where he built a house as early as 1631. And I don't think there are quite 10 hills over there. It looks like one big hill, but at any rate, 10 Hills Farm was Winthrop's farm, and it ended up in the 19th century being owned by a succession of high-profile owners like Elias Haskett Derby of Salem, and this was like one of his many properties that he owned. And then Patrick Tracy Jackson, who was so instrumental in getting Lowell off the ground and the mills built up. And then in 1877, the last remnants of the old Winthrop house disappear. Now, getting to the Mystic River part, this is, for a waterway that's only 7 miles long, it has a lot of historical significance. I should say that it is part of a 76 square mile watershed that includes 44 ponds and lakes and a number of streams and brooks. And going back to the early 1630s, over on the shores of 10 Hills, this is where a ship called, I've seen it two ways, the Blessing or the Blessing of the Bay. So this ship was the first commercial ship built in really New England, 1631, at the behest of John Winthrop. And it was charged with trading with New Amsterdam, now Manhattan, and the the port settlements along southern New England and Long Island. And it did have some kind of a military provision on the ship in case it ran into trouble with a foreign adversary. That never happened, in part because the ship only had a very short life. In 1633, it was lost at sea, making a trip down to Virginia. Okay, so over time you have mills being, tide mills being built along its shores, grist mills, sawmills, and then we'll get into what happens in the 20th century with efforts to control it. But I should just also say that the name supposedly is derived from the Massachusetts tribe named Missatuck, which means river driven by the tides or tidal waves or something like that. And that makes perfect sense because the opening, it begins down by the Mystic Tobin Bridge, right by that open water. Okay, let's see. I think that's it for this stop. We're going to talk about some other things. Follow me. I want to talk about what was going on the other side of I93, parallel to Broadway in parts, and that would be the Middlesex Canal, which is constructed between 1792 and 1804. And again, depending on what source you're referring to, it's either 22 miles down from Chelmsford to the Boston area, to Boston Harbor, or 27 miles. But what the Middlesex Canal meant to the economy of eastern Massachusetts was huge, because it provided a way to more efficiently get two things down to Boston from the hinterlands around Chelmsford and what would later be Lowell, and that would be agricultural products and building materials. And so, we're talking about a canal that was 30 feet wide and 3 feet deep, that had a series of locks and even an aqueduct up in the Billerica area that the water went across. Yes, there was this commercial element, that was about 80% of it, but then there was a sort of a passenger element, somewhat minor and touristic, of some Bostonians going up on a Sunday afternoon on the Middlesex Canal boats and getting off to picnic along the shores of the Mystic Lakes and Horn Pond and Winchester. So the Middlesex Canal essentially takes business away from Newburyport, but it will do great things for the economy of the Boston area for a time. And then what happens is, in the mid-1830s, you have the dawn of the railroad age. And, the poor Middlesex Canal is actually being used to carry materials that are going to build a railway. And in some parts, the Middlesex Canal actually paralleled the Boston and Lowell Railroad. So that between the mid-1830s and the early 1850s, the railroad will overtake the canal as a faster, efficient way to move commercial goods and passengers around. So there's that aspect to this area in eastern Somerville here. Then we need to talk about the brick industry. And across the street at 120 Middlesex Avenue is what might be considered to be the last gasp of the brick industry over this way. The heyday of the brick industry in Somerville is the 1820s to the 1880s. And Spalding, what used to be Spalding Brick Company over there, the original main office and retail outlet was built in 1933 with this newer brick part with the awnings added. I'm not exactly sure when, but the company was there until 2007 when it moved up to Wilmington, Mass. So that was kind of the end of the brick story here. But basically what's happening is that the Mystic River is well known for having rich areas of clay deposits along its length, and particularly in Medford, between 1650 and 1750, there was this major brick industry in Medford, with the Royal House being built of those bricks, the House Museum, and okay. So here, the brick heyday is starting off slowly in the 1820s. By the 1850s, it's going to full tilt. Why? Because you have these developing neighborhoods in Boston that need bricks. Why? Think the south end of Boston with all those brick row houses. Think parts of Roxbury, Dorchester, South Boston with brick housing. So that's in part what's driving this. And the downside of all this prosperity is what's happening to the landscape. And so we're talking about the area between Broadway and where we are, where the brickyards tended to be. And so you've got this landscape of clay pits. You've got flimsy, crummy-looking wooden shelters for storing the bricks after they've been made. You've got kilns with these brick chimneys. It's just a blighted, awful-looking landscape. But by the 1880s, it's becoming clear that the land is becoming, at least over East Somerville Way, becoming more valuable for residential house construction, and particularly in the 1910s and 20s period. So, brick industry gives way essentially to more profitable residential real estate.
And interestingly, we don't have that many houses that are or buildings made of brick in Somerville.
And that's true. It's really interesting. For a big brick-making town, there are very few, late 19th century brick buildings, and sort of like, one length of a brick row, looks like the developer thought, oh, I'm starting something that's going to turn into street after street of red brick row houses. Didn't happen in Somerville.
Was it because brick was too expensive?
Well, that might have played a role in it, yeah.
And also, I think did the fire in Boston, did that have an effect on the fact that they did a lot more building with brick than they ended up doing with wood in the end because of the
Well,
material?
they started actually long before the Great Fire. In 1803, there was an ordinance that any building over 10 feet built in Boston had to be built of stone or brick to cut down on the risk of fire. And that Great Fire was blamed on the configuration of the mansard roof and the way it was sheathed with this very flammable tar paper under the shingles so that the fire could jump from roof to roof and really start this terrible destruction. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
It just seems that the South End has a lot of bricks and brick rows. We have some row houses that are made out of brick here in Somerville that are designated actually on Central Street in particular, and Adams Street I think, but there's very few. It's surprising. When you see one, you kind of look up and notice it.
this seems like an odd place to stop, but
This is where they
to
have
talk
go
about
your rows
the
back.
Ford assembly plant that used to be all along here. Ford Motors comes into this picture in 1925, and by that time the marshland associated with the Mystic River had been filled in. You then have spur lines coming in off the Boston and Maine Railroad that will be very helpful to Ford for delivery purposes, also for the first national grocery store chain that has a food distribution facility here. The mid-1920s are really a transformative time for Somerville between what's happening here with Ford and First National and what's happening over off of Union Square where the Brick Bottom Artist Studios are, which was originally the A&P grocery store's food distribution center. So what's happening is, there's been this land making, and also very importantly, the McGrath and O'Brien Highway is built as part of Route 128, Route 28. And confusingly, it's said that Route 28 starts in Easton on the Cape, and it follows existing roads until it gets to pieces like McGrath and O'Brien that are new, and it goes all the way up to southern New Hampshire. Okay, so this McGrath and O'Brien Highway is going to be very key for 1920s industry to want to set up here. And I should also add that it's probably the only highway, maybe even in all of the U.S., named for priests. Monsignor McGrath and Monsignor O'Brien, who were affiliated with St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church in Union Square. Okay, so
They provide their blessings for it.
I don't know if they provided their blessings, but who knows? So we're standing here because this side of the building of the Ford assembly plant, where the cars were assembled piece by piece on a conveyor belt that went down 1,330 feet in a building that was 30 feet in height inside. And when this plant opened in 26, it was built in 25, the newspapers said that the airy and light-filled atmosphere would be conducive for the workers' health, mental health, which I just laughed at. I don't know why I found that funny, but at any rate, this side of the building is meaningful to some folks who live in East Somerville because there was much more in the way of big windows along this stretch of street, and you could look in and you could see the cars being assembled, and the people of East Somerville could look in and see their husbands or brothers or fathers working on the assembly line. So you only get a hint of those big windows when you look along here. You can see the original size of the openings. They basically filled between the piers, the brick piers that project out.
So this is the original structure?
So this is the original structure,
This is what you have to
but it has
slide.
been much, much altered inside.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and also
Needless to say.
this was a kind of a novel area as well. When this was, after Ford left here and others as well, then it became in the 1980s a mall. It was our first enclosed mall in the city of Somerville, and it was a big to-do, frankly. When they opened it, East Bay Development Company did that. And one of the things about it that was interesting is they were able to adaptively reuse it in a way that was pretty cool because they had the high ceilings and, you know, what you would have in this old warehouse or with an old plant. But people in Somerville were very disturbed. I've heard conversations with people saying, well, when are they going to finish the roof, for God's sake? So it didn't catch on immediately with a lot of people. But I would always argue that this is probably our first and largest adaptive reuse project in the city of Somerville. So some of us would like to see it stay. It is on the drawing boards to be taken down. So enjoy it while it's here. Oh.
So we'll get more of a three-dimensional sense of it at our next stop. Okay, so I think this is as good a place as any to take a look over this way towards what used to be Ford, you know, that whole assembly plant was enlarged in 1937, but then in the late 1950s, Ford runs into trouble because it produces the Edsel car, which was roundly rejected by the American public for a variety of reasons, aesthetics. I'm blanking on what the other complaints were, but it did not go over well. It's named for Edsel Ford, who was the heir to Henry Ford II, who in turn was the son of the Henry Ford, who really started the company in the 19-teens, famously with the Model T in 1915. And this whole Ford story just brings up the fact that Somerville was in on the ground floor of early automotive industries, that we still to this day have early gas stations, early automobile storage facilities, early all kinds of automobile associated businesses still standing. And as we get further away from the early automobile age, these remnants, these survivors become more valuable historically, I think.
So just to add on to that, you might know some of them right now. We are trying to, the preservationists in the city, to actually retain those and preserve them and adaptively reuse them to something else. And so on Bow Street in Somerville, you might notice that there was a very small station there that is being brought forward onto the site, and something is going around it, so it's going to dwarf it, but it's still there.
So what happens is that Ford shuts down completely in 1958. And so this means that this huge source of local employment is no longer with the city. And, you know, it'll take until the late 70s, early 80s to figure out what to do next. And the what to do next is trying to follow a sort of suburban shopping mall model, which is really what they knew at that time. And so, for example, one end of the former Ford facility was Jordan Marsh, and the other end was Kmart, and there were these other somewhat brand name stores in the middle, and there was a multiplex, the Assembly Square Theater, and all of that. But it still, I guess, had a sort of a low economic impact despite the presence of all this retail. So that by the early 21st century, This is when you have a new group of city planners at Somerville City Hall that are well versed in models that make for vital city centers worldwide. You have the Mystic River Task Force, this initially grassroots volunteer group that is really helping to shape what happens, and we're talking about now what's happening off in this direction. What's going to happen over here? We're talking 45 acres of what will become Assembly Row. So Assembly Row is within the larger Assembly Square. And then you also have a new young mayor, Joseph Curtatone, who brings great ideas and a new vision and all of that. So it's this, the stars are aligning in the favor of Assembly Row becoming a place that's, not only worth living and working in, but as a destination place.
So if I can interject a
Yes.
little bit here, as a city planner who did leave, I've actually been working for the city since 1980, 6 mayors now. So what did happen has a lot to do with the larger economy as well, and that is to do with industrial land in general. And industrial land in cities became less and less viable because that wasn't the highest and best use, is the feeling. More and more people were wanting to live in the cities, and as soon as you have residential development as an option, then everybody's clamoring for that. So in addition to that, industrial land obviously wasn't able to compete with that, so these one-story, large, massive buildings were no longer going to be competitive. So the mall has been here all the way through, although it did get changed by the East Bay development, then got sold to another national development. They changed it so that it was no longer an interior one as well. And the newest developers, which is Frit, are actually going to take this down entirely and rebuild and probably go up and such. So that's coming. And in addition to that, a lot of things happened nationwide, and the fact that the return to the city happened, and so more and more people wanted to be here. So then the idea was that there was more interest in residential development, as well as communities that you didn't have to drive every place, and that you had everything more closer by, and you could walk or bike, and this is what we're in the midst of right now. I'm sure you all know. Assembly Connect can certainly talk about this because they are the ones that are trying to promote public transit here. And so this is all part of this whole change that's going about in the last couple of decades. Then also with Joe Curtatone as the mayor, and the city planning department, with which I still work, has now very much embraced. And National Development, FRIT Development, which is Federal Real Estate Investment Company, has very much endorsed all of this. And so we've been working very carefully with them, and they have done many people think a wonderful job at actually making this a mixed-use community to the nth degree. And we're going to just go to a little part of it. We did another tour earlier with Assembly Connect, which we're hoping to do again interior to the Assembly Row. But this tour is actually more focusing on the outer part of it. But we do want to take you down a little bit because Frit has done, we think, a nice job at trying to retain some of that industrial feel as well.
Before this, there was IKEA, right? IKEA was going to build something here.
And so big box development was very much a part of when East Bay was here in the mall. So we had Home Depot, which is a sprawling building as well, and Circuit City, for those of you who've been here longer, and you can still see the signs. Those kind of big boxes were popular, and those are the ones that wanted to be here. Then we were able to convince, we being Fred and lots of other people working on that, for them not to come here, IKEA, because IKEA was very much car driven. People didn't come here and take their their couches and beds back on the bus. So, yeah, please come forward up here so that we can, Stephanie and Allison. Both. Okay, that's great.
Hi everybody, thanks for attending today's walk. I'm Stephanie Lee. I am the program manager for Assembly Connect. This is Allison Simmons, one of our directors for Northeast Consultant. So Assembly Connect is a transportation management association under Northeast Consultant. We have two directors, Allison and Andrea. They are the co-founders and my directors for that consultant firm. But we're here right over on Canal Street. We have a small little office. Our goal for the district is really to reduce the amount of cars coming in and out of the area. As you can see, plenty. It is very busy today. I was in the middle area, crowded. Cars were zooming and speeding. So my job here is to really create and develop programs and services, work with local advocacy groups, community groups, like you folks, to host events like this to promote walking, biking, the use of sustainable transportation. Now, all of our programs and services here are free for the people who live, work, and visit Assembly Square.
Who does that exclude?
Nobody.
That's what we're saying.
Well, it excludes people. If you live in Seaport and work in Seaport and you don't even come to Assembly, then obviously our programs don't pertain to you. But yeah, we're happy to be here. It's been an exciting ride. I've been here since 2019. Part of our board, we have Mass General Brigham's, Federal Realty, who manages and develops Assembly Square. We have the Mystic View Task Force, as well as the City of Somerville. Some of you might know Brad Rawson. He is on our board. Yeah, did you want to add anything?
Just that, our goal, like Steph said, our goal is to make sure that we have as many accessible, sustainable transportation options here at Assembly. You can't see the orange line, but the orange line is right behind us. This blue bike station is something Assembly Connect purchased and paid for. This is the second station in the district. So as we continue to grow, we want to make sure that we're not just bringing cars in, that we're bringing sustainable transportation options to folks. So
Yeah, today seems to be particularly
if
busy.
anybody
Do you
wants.
happen to know why there's all these cars zooming by? It's a Sunday. It's usually quieter.
I think it's
I think
one
it's
of
the weather.
the hottest weekends we've had.
There's also a Celtics game, so it's a nice place to come and have lunch before you hit the Celtics game at 3:30. Probably.
Yeah. So we have like little info sheets I would like to hand out. I also have hand sanitizers. We probably all want some. There is a QR code attached. This is to basically our one-stop shop platform. All of our challenges, programs, and services are on this platform. Anytime you come to Assembly Square, walking, biking, you'll get points. Even if you drive, you'll just get a little bit. It'll take you a little bit longer to achieve these rewards. But the more points you rack up, you can redeem them for gift cards to Assembly Row merchants. So that'd be restaurants and stores. And it's completely free for you guys. So today's trip would count as well. So I'll just add.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Assembly Connect is another indication that Frit, that I mentioned before, the developers, have been very supportive of doing a lot of these things and trying to get rid of cars, because this has been viewed always, you only get there by car. There is a bus that comes here, the 90 bus, I think it is, at Davis Square and such, but it doesn't run as frequently as many people would like, and it is not something that a lot of people take. So the good news is Frit, again, working with the state as well as the city, has been able to get an orange line stop here, which was quite a long fight, and they actually paid a good deal of money to actually get the station here. It's a stop that goes from Bunker Hill, between Bunker Hill and Wellington's. It's not a great distance, but it makes a huge impact on here and being able to get here for people in downtown Boston, as well as others outside as well. So that's a big coup on their part. And then the blue bikes, I think everybody knows that the blue bikes are another company, but they're more and more places, and they're now all over Assembly Square, East Somerville as well, which was a long time coming. And so we do encourage you to think about other ways to get here than your car. If you're buying a couch, we understand that you might not be on your bike, but otherwise, a day like today, if it wasn't going to rain any minute, might have been a good day to get here. And again, this walking tour will show you how to do that. Okay, walking and biking.
And I just want to jump in by saying that Assembly Row is a great place to see public art. And I think that it's really been beautifully melded into the design here. And Exhibit A is this giant 6-story screen over here, this kind of digital screen that looks pretty blank at the moment. But
if you look in your brochure, again.
You get the idea that from time to time, there will be digital artworks by local or regional artists that are set forth within those heads, those conversing heads, on the side of the Puma Athletic Apparel building. So that's all pretty exciting. Without further ado, let's head down into the heart of what we're talking about here. Okay, so I just want to point out that we're now in the heart of Assembly Row, the new part of eastern Somerville. And off in this direction is 5 Points Park with some of the eateries and the Lego giraffe. And then on the banks of the Mystic River, the little amphitheater and the parkland. And then over in this direction, the Mass General Brigham Insurance Company building that used to be Partners. And then this wonderful Cafe Nero, which has some of this, I would call it Rust Belt sculpture, but it may have come from the old Central Steel building that was one of the holdouts down here that lasted into the early 21st century. And, you know, this is, you know, the designers of this quarter really have tried to remind us of the industry that went on over here. The Columbia store building has printers, you know, typeface worked into it. And somewhere embedded in the street are more reminders of mechanical parts. And the buildings have a kind of retro look about them. I wouldn't call these postmodern, but they're certainly trying to evoke, you know, think the former R&H Stearns building on Tremont Street across from the Park Street T station. These kind of early 20th century office commercial building types that are being recalled here in a really fine way. So let's just
before you do, I do want to give a plug here to Fred. I don't work for Fred, but I will give them credit where credit is due. Fred had reached out to us as city planners to ask us about what we wanted to see here in a lot of ways. And of course, what we did want to see is some of the history retained. And so they have worked really hard with us in the naming of the streets, for example. They asked us for ideas on that, which would hark back to yesteryear here. And of course, as Ed just pointed out, a lot of the building designs actually reflect that. If you look at Cafe Nero, the framing of it there, a lot of this is that Central Steel was a major company here. Again, this was all industrial land before. It was all various big sprawling industrial companies. Had a lot of jobs here that I want to mention that a lot of people in East Somerville worked at as well, which is another reason for the connection between the two communities or neighborhoods. But you know, they did things like that in order to evoke a lot of what the past was, and so we're happy about that. If you go in Cafe Nero in particular, along the side of the building, there's some wonderful artwork that they've done there. And the other thing that we also asked for is a lot more open and green space, and I think they've done a really nice job at trying to provide that and keep the plantings alive, which isn't always the case, and well maintained over time. So it just gives you a pleasant experience walking around here, and hopefully you'll park in the garage, which is free, and it's not?
Yeah, take the train.
Well, I was getting to that. I was thinking if you park in the garage, it's free, because some people, as somebody pointed out, don't all live within walking, biking, or transit. And we do want them to come. This is a regional mall, or it's even probably a wider draw than that. So, but put your car in the garage, and then you can walk around every place from there. There's also meters on the street as well. And as they've pointed out, Assembly Connect, the T is right here. And if you can take that, that's the best way to go. And it does run for many hours into the day and night. So it is a real option. And of course, there's the blue bikes as well. So.
Okay, so we're not going to go too far down Foley Street here, but just far enough. Over on the left is the Amelia Earhart Dam that goes across the Mystic River, and funding for that came about in 1966, and the whole purpose of it was to regulate the levels of the water in the river that varied from 0 to 13 feet, and they just wanted it at one level, and to prevent flooding, and also to cut down on the salt water going far up the Mystic towards the lower Mystic Lake. And it was named for Amelia Earhart, who I think most of us know is a pioneer in early aviation, and was among the first, and certainly the first woman to fly solo from North America to Europe in 1927. and created a group for women aviators called the 99s. I'm not quite sure what the 99 had to do with that.
Aspiring, right?
Aspiring, right, to get to that number,
Yes,
maybe. But and you know, and she was in the forefront of promoting the idea of commercial airlines. That you know, she was predicting the age of jet setters, I guess, in a way. And you know, wrote a newspaper column, and her connection to this area is that she lived in Medford in the 1920s. So very much part of this area. And then to the right of it is the Encore Casino and Hotel, which was built between 2014 and 2019. And the wonderful thing that came out of that was the extensive cleanup along the Mystic River that the Wind Corporation did, which really got rid of a huge industrial wasteland mess. And now there are plans, hopefully someday, to build a pedestrian bridge that will link the casino with Assembly Row here.
Again, your advocacy is always helpful here.
Okay, let's...
Okay, so we're standing here in this very beautiful, modest, charming Somerville underpass here. It is better known as the Kensington Connector, and I think it's clearly obvious because Kensington Street is actually an extension of it. The rest of the street isn't here any longer. And this is interim. We have another partner on this tour today, which is East Somerville Main Street. And unfortunately, we don't seem to have Teresa here. Lindsay is the new director there. And so she is back at the reception where she'll be. And she was going to talk a little bit about the status of this. But as I understand it from the city, we don't own this here. This is actually under the state. So we need to work with DOT on this, and they are working on actually creating a better pass-through, if you will. Karen, do you want to say anything? I know you work with some of these groups that are...
Eventually, there'll be like a raised crosswalk.
And why don't you come over here so the camera can hear you? That's well. Thanks.
Eventually, so eventually there'll be raised crosswalks and, you know, better lights, stoplights, and that kind of thing. So the community's been needing this for a really long time. It's a very dangerous intersection. A lot of people have been hit.
Well, I would just add that MassDOT, it's been designed. They have phase 2 and phase 3 design. We're just waiting for the funding to come through to do it. So it's been approved and it's planned.
Yeah, and I think the raised crosswalk is it, and also I should point out this is actually a whole lot better than it used to be, which is why I wanted to bring people through here, because if you came here even a year or two ago, it didn't have the lights, the crosswalk here, so it was literally run for your life to get to the other side. And as I said before, people in East Somerville work at the Ford Motor Plant originally and all the industrial operations, but now at a lot of the retail, commercial, and businesses here, so they have to do this every day.
So roughly, how long do you think it will take for completion?
Oh, for completion? Oh, I think we're years away. This is a very interim. The next thing is also interim with the raised crosswalks. We have done things like the murals and things.
Like 10 years?
Yeah, I wouldn't hold me to it because we're working with a lot of state and federal agencies on this, and so advocacies from people like yourself, as well as Assembly Connect, as well as the residents at East Somerville Main Street has been working on this for some time. Just so you know, East Somerville Main Street is actually a bridge between the residents and the businesses to work together on things. So they've been very intricately and intimately involved with this for many years. And again, that's where this comes from, some of the artwork you'll see along here. So we have a member of East Somerville Main Street here just recently. She's moved here and she joined right away, which is great. And they have a lot of others. It's a membership organization, and if you know of anybody that lives in East Somerville, I encourage you to ask them to join because numbers matter.
And if you notice, this is 74 Middlesex, which is a development that's just broken ground here. This is going to be a lab space. But I think as we start to see more things develop on this end of the the district of Assembly, I think you'll start to see more beautification. Part of their design is to put some public spaces, some grass, some more trees. Middlesex Road is going to be going on a road diet, so the road we'd walk down that felt like we couldn't even cross, we'll have crosswalks, it'll have neck downs, it'll have bike lanes, it'll have wider sidewalks, less room for traffic, more room for people, and that'll come with as more development comes along Middlesex Ave.
So this is an exciting time why we bring you through here now, because then you can say, I remember when. And we're making lots of progress. It's been slower than maybe some of us would like, but that's the nature of development. There's so many other priorities and such, but Assembly Row, it's now a new neighborhood, we're calling it. And to be honest with you, when I was the planning director many years ago, it was only industrial. We tried to save it as industrial because it had jobs, and good paying jobs and things. But it became clear in the marketplace that wasn't going to work. And then we embraced the idea that residents could live here as well, which was a big step, frankly. Because once you have residents in an area, then they start advocating and clamoring for residential amenities. And if you came on our James Walk last week, you would have heard this as well, because Brick Bottom was live workspace for artists, which just sounds like a great concept. But the idea is they're in an industrial zone, and they were able to benefit from the lofts in industrial buildings, which was great for their working. But when they also lived there as residents, they started to ask for more trees and parks, and our kids have to cross over to the highways and such. And so it became much more difficult to maintain it as live workspace and such. And so the same thing here at Assembly Row. But that's why we've embraced this whole idea about making it a multi-use community, so that we want the residents there to feel at home. But we also want them to feel part of the rest of Somerville, because it's easy for them not to. I mean, I don't need to tell you the geographical barriers between the highway here and where they're located and such makes it easy just to stay over there like an enclave of people. And that's not what we want. We really want them to be part of the city and vice versa. And so Assembly Connect is being instrumental in helping us do that, and a walking tour like this as well, and other things that we'll be doing in partnership. So if you know anybody that lives in Assembly Row, encourage them to.
Yeah, we did walking tours this series. That's how we met you guys. We did a series of walking tours last summer with residents, just trying to help people understand they're connected.
And let me jump in here with some I93 history.
Yes.
That this is, the funding for this came out of a 1957 federal transit bill under Eisenhower. And by 1964, 24 miles of I-93 had been built from New Hampshire down to Medford. And the holdup was Somerville. 3 miles remained to be constructed, and local people here really protested and fought valiantly to, I don't know what they thought was going to happen, but I-93 resulted in the loss of 300 businesses and many people displaced from their homes. So, that's how we got I-93 out of this long ago 1950s federal.
The picture
and there it is. There's the beast right there. Right. Okay.
And just to emphasize that as well, I mean, what it led to is a lot of displacement of not only businesses but also residents and such, and that's what they were fighting for. They didn't want to leave, obviously. Last week, again, if you've done the Janes Walk, that's what that was all about. Brick Bottom as well was a neighborhood, and we actually had some people that lived in the Brick Bottom neighborhood talk about it and what it was like. It had a very strong Greek community there at one point, and it was a wonderful place where they said to grow up. Everything was there. They could speak their own language, and it felt like the North End. I mean, I think you all know that we lost the part of downtown Boston with this, and where the Charles River Park is and such. So we've had a lot of areas of the Boston area, as well as throughout the country, which have been considered blight by some planners and politicians, and so they wipe out the whole area and do clearances, they slum clearance, and then they put something else in there. And so a lot of these areas that's what these are. And so what we're trying to do is bring them back and revitalize them, at the same time as actually have remnants of that past still incorporated, so that people come back here feel like, oh, I remember that. There's some kind of landmark or something there that says, that's where I grew up and such. So this in East Somerville, what happened there is a lot of people got displaced as well, and they fought, as you said, valiantly. But a lot of them are still there in the state streets, as we call them. They're named after different states in the country, and East Somerville Main Street is very active in there, and that's why it's a very cohesive community still. So that's the good news.
Okay. First of all, I should say that we are now in the old East Somerville neighborhood, which is, and its development began around the time that Somerville became an independent town. That would be 1842. Somerville was originally part of Charlestown. Charlestown founded in 1629. And then in 1842, Somerville breaks away, and then East Somerville starts to develop, with Broadway being the commercial focal point. And off in this direction is Foss Park, which was set out during the 1870s at a time when Somervillians got this thought that they're running out of space for parkland. The residential construction is starting to boom, and let's get a park for Somerville, originally called Broadway Park. The criticism was that it wasn't really a park that was central to the city, that it's over here on the border between East Somerville and Winter Hill. But build it.
Part of the city would be considered where City Hall
Yeah.
is, and the library and the high school.
Right.
Civic Center.
And that up there is called Central Park. That campus experience is called Central Park, where the city buildings are. But at any rate, it's called Broadway Park until 1921, when it's named for Saxton Foss, who died fighting in France during World War I for the Allies, for the U.S. And and there's a very lovely postcard illustrating what Foss Park looked a long time ago.
We don't mention it, but actually his father was very well known too. He was a poet laureate for the city, and he was responsible for the library system. He was very involved in heading it up for many years.
Right. So just know that Foss Park is over there. Now we're going to head up to Garfield Avenue. Let's talk about Dinos Pasta over here, which was started in the late 1940s by Ralph Matarazzo, and it is 4 generations continued by his great-grandson and great-granddaughter-in-law. And I can vouch for the sauces. I can't vouch for the pasta because it's not on my diet, but it is a great food institution, and in a street that does have historical associations with food. Across the street we have a former early 1920s bakery. 2 bakeries were there up until at least the late 1940s, and then we have Dinos here, and really this is one of the best places to see public art in the city. Exhibit A here with this pasta making mural, which was painted by Michael Talbot, who was originally from Jamaica. He painted this in 2021, like last year, and he said that he wanted to convey the Matarazzo family's love for making pasta. That this was all about the love that goes into food making for your family or whatever. So that is just a gift to the city, in my opinion.
Well, and I would also like to add, we went by it too quickly to see, but if you go around to the other side of this block, there's a continuation, a mural as well that's done showing a pasta making as well. There's a mural that was done probably more like 5 or 6 years ago or so. And this is a good intro for Lindsay, who's joined us, as I said, because East Somerville Main Street has been instrumental working with the Arts Council to commission these types of murals, and they actually do a tour of them, as I recall, so a walk. So.
Yeah. So we worked with, we got a grant from, it was Somerville Arts Council and Mass Cultural Council, to do this painting last year. And most of the ones that you'll see along Broadway, we've kind of had a hand in getting at least funding for. And yes, as you said, it's a wonderful place to see public art, and we have a new one that's going up in Connection where we're going to end. We haven't started it yet, but it will be done this summer.
Cool. And you had something to do with the art that actually introduces you to the Kensington Connection as we come through, I think. And so,
yes. Yep. We were, I believe, the city. We worked with the city on that. But yep.
Right. And just to mention the other connection to here that we didn't take you on, there is another one that is. I don't know, say more visual or more of a vista, is at the other end of Assembly Square. If you go past the Mass General, the old partner site and such, there's another one that rests, and there's a wonderful mural underneath the underpass there that has been there for many years, and they've just redone it as well. But it meant going through a lot of Assembly Square that wasn't all that historic, so we chose not to. But there's 2 different entry points over to East Somerville, and that takes you right opposite the Mount Vernon Street, which is a very significant street for 2 reasons. One, it has a restaurant there that's been there for decades, and it's wonderful food. And it has a historic district on Mount Vernon Street as well, where a lot of the houses have been designated and fixed up as going back to the 1840s. So, and we've done many tours down there, and if you want to learn anything about East Somerville in more depth, I suggest you go to our website, because we've done a lot of walking tours. In fact, for a while we were doing them every year in different sections of East Somerville. This is Ed and myself, and the brochures are all can be found there. And actually on your website as well. East Somerville Main Street has a website. So.
Okay, so we're looking across the street here at the Walter Littlefield house that was built about 1888. And Walter Littlefield had quite a business as a dairyman, as delivering milk to East Somerville and other parts of Somerville. And he will live there into the 19-teens, and then by the late 20s, it becomes the Bryant Funeral Home, which was in that role until at least the early 1950s. And this was a funeral home that started out in Charlestown in the 1850s, maintained that Austin Street location for its Charlestown home, and then had this beginning in the late 1920s. But this is such an interesting example of the Queen Anne style. Lots of times with the Queen Anne, you've got this sprawling, lots of projections, but here it's compact with lots of projections. So you've got this really interesting angle, 2-story bay here, and you see what's typically Queen Anne about it is the mix of clapboards and wood shingles, and the L in the back, these different projections. With the Queen Anne, you're talking about a style that is coming out of Great Britain in its brick form, and you see it in Back Bay row houses with a lot of terracotta ornament on the walls, and but in the wooden version, it's sort of like the American carpenter having a lot of fun with form and with the way materials are displayed together, and
decorative elements
and the direct decorative elements, right? So this was, and quote me, I may be misquoting here, but I believe that in the late 1990s, that's when it was preserved by a company that facilitated the creation of assisted living facilities.
It's actually a group residence, and they actually restored it. This is a nonprofit group, and they've done a number of houses in the city, and they've done a fabulous job in actually restoring details. It did not look like this before. They've done a really nice job on it. So it is not a designated structure, although it probably could be. But this might be a good opportunity to mention that we do have a local historic district ordinance in the city of Somerville. So you heard Ed mention before about the National Register that we have as well, which is for properties that meet the standards of the federal government. But we also have one at the local level, which we call LHDs, for local historic districts. You'll see in many cases, but not always, a sign on them that actually says that it's a local historic district. And so we'll see some today that will go by. But that's an opportunity for us to say those properties that actually have significance to us here in the Somerville, either for historic reasons or architectural, or oftentimes both. And to work with a homeowner to designate it, and then when they do any work on the exterior of that property that's going to be not reversible easily, then they need to work with us to get approval for that. And so it's our way of trying to say to people, notice these buildings because they are really remarkable, and also trying to give them some technical advice and assistance in keeping it up. So we'll see a couple on the way.
I want to talk first about Broadway, this colonial, very deeply colonial era highway going back to the mid-1630s. And Broadway originally, as it went up from Sullivan Square, up Winter Hill, but then jogging to the right down Main Street into Medford, that was the original stretch of Broadway. It wasn't until the early 1790s that Broadway went up and over Winter Hill as we know it today, and then all the way out to Arlington Center. So the part of Broadway that Paul Revere followed was, yes, right in front of us here, up Winter Hill, and then jogging over to Main, and then out to the Lexington Green on April 19th, 1775. And then you have transportation really transforming this avenue. The first horse-drawn sort of carriage public transportation took place in the late 1850s, and then by 1890 you had the electric trolley, and then by the 19-teens you have the automobile playing a significant role in the way people shopped. So, and East Somerville here, particularly the States Avenue area further down on the left, is Exhibit A of this tremendous 19-teens, 1920s, mostly two-family house construction that took place. And then, of course, then you're going to need a really robust, vigorous commercial piece along Broadway here. We're standing here in part to look down East Cross Street at these row houses from 1880. And these were constructed for a developer named Seaman Klaus, who was a kind of a textiles dealer, but also a real estate mogul. And this happened over a long period of time. But he did own some property in downtown Boston, and it is said that his building downtown was the first to catch fire during the Great Fire of 1872. And so, he may be one of these contractors who thought, oh, well, here's the first brick row, and now there are going to be many more to follow. And that didn't happen in part because you have something called the Panic of 1873, the financial panic, national in scope, where people lost their savings and lost their property, and he could not continue. And I know I said 1880, that's true, but he also had plans that pre-existed before these houses. And then I also want to mention the fire station from the early 20th century, which originally, that tower looked like a Florentine Renaissance crenellated tower that used to be there. And it used to have beautiful awnings over all the windows on this side in Broadway. And so now this is a senior center and a youth center.
Yes, right. That's right.
Okay, and then just looking across the street here at this commercial group, circa 1870, row houses that were hoisted onto an early 1920s commercial extended storefront here. So if you were to look around the corner, you would see an identical group that actually starts on the ground and works its way up. Here, this is just sitting atop a later commercial piece. And that was a somewhat common thing that happened in the Boston area as a way to, fitting that commercial piece in any way they could. For our next to last stop, I want to point out the former park garage here. I mentioned that, Somerville has this rich early auto age history, and that can be seen in this 2014 building that was built as a car storage facility for 40 cars. It also had a machine shop in the basement. This is as early as 2014. And it had these enormous, huge gallons of gasoline were stored in here. So this is early and very utilitarian automobile age Somerville right here. 1914. Yep, 19. So this is where we'll have our reception. We're looking at a former commercial space that was transformed recently by the Boston Bay architects. Prior to this transformation, it was home to Mudflat's ceramic studio. This is going back quite a while. And now Mudflat's is in a former theater further up Broadway. But this is now the home of the Connection United Methodist Church. Do you want to say a few words? Because I know East Somerville is...
We moved offices into Connection in January, so we are now based out of Connection as well. And yeah, we're Jordan Harris, who you'll meet, he's the pastor here, is really working hard to make this a community space. So it's a space that a lot of Project Soup has their weekly meals here. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, we're in here now, so it's definitely a space that is growing, and along with the church.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I was just saying to somebody here in East Somerville used to be an area where a lot of immigrant groups came to, and it was considered the lower rent area of the city, and so it wasn't as necessarily as coveted as some other parts of the city, but that has totally changed in the last 10 years. And now housing prices have gone up both for buying a house as well as for rental. But it has a lot of wonderful advantages. It has a lot of ethnic restaurants here and such, and a lot owned by these local business people. And so East Somerville Main Street has been instrumental working with the city to help them wherever needed with technical assistance and marketing. A pandemic didn't help anything, but a lot of them, most of them have survived, I think. And I just want to mention that we do a foodie crawl every year. I should say we, but East Somerville Main Street, and I always volunteer, so I consider. But that is something that happens in September. Yep. Okay, and that's an opportunity. You buy a ticket for like $25, and it gives you access to a whole variety of restaurants here. It's a fun way to find out what's here in one night. It's often a beautiful night as well. And there's music, and there's beer gardens as well. Yep. So it's something to put on your calendar to come down and explore it and such, because there really is, a rich diversity here. And this is another reason why we're trying to get people in Assembly Row to appreciate that even though Assembly Row has its fair share of restaurants and of ethnic backgrounds and such, a lot of them, frankly, are not independent ones. They're larger chains and such, where these are the sole proprietors here, and they're very friendly. The food is very fresh, very authentic, and definitely an experience to have. So.
Great.
So speaking of food, we brought you all this way, and now we're going to reward you with some tacos, I believe, which you've arranged for to be here. And so I hope you'll all indulge and come in and ask questions and share any information you'd like with us. Thanks. And thank you so much for coming today.
Yes,
if you didn't get a brochure, then by all means, or you want a second one, let me know. I have some extras. This will actually, videotaping, be put on our website, which, as I've mentioned a number of you, is on the very back of the brochure, which is the Historic Events and Education website, which is one that I maintain, and it has videos on there from a lot of prior walking tours that we have done, as well as a whole section with brochures and such. So if you've missed any of them and you want to go back, got lots of reading to do. Thank you for coming today.